Mr. Džefri, for starters, can you share with us some insights from your extensive experience, having spent more than 20 years developing some of the most renowned AI software systems in the industry, and specifically your time at Google as vice president, where you have overseen some of the most important projects, such as the development of Google X, Google Maps, and more.
Thanks, Bojana. I'm very excited to be here and excited to share my perspective with your audience. So my experience you highlighted, I was spent 13 years at Google, and it was really a super exciting time. I didn't quite join when Google was in the garage, but joined a little after in 2003. So Google was about 1,000 employees. But in the period I was there, we went from 1,000 to 100,000, and from less than $1 billion in revenues to $100 billion in revenues. So an amazing period. I think, and that included building some, literally the first machine learning systems, or if we broadly use the term AI, I would consider machine learning, deep learning, and now generative AI all part of the AI family. My experience at Google included building some of the first machine learning systems there. And one of the things that I took away from Google is the importance and power of audacious goals. And a concept that we talked about at Google is anytime you're doing something, you want to think about kind of 10x goals. So not just something that's incrementally better or 20% or 30% better, but things that are an order of magnitude at least better, or 10x better. And that, you mentioned my time and experience at Google X. That was, in fact, where the name Google X comes from, of being 10x beyond. And one of the things that I found with audacious goals is anytime you're doing something is going to be challenging, so you might as well set your sights very high. And by having those very audacious goals, it changes the way you think about things. So instead of just things being a little better, where you can get there from where you are today, with a 10x goal, you really have to approach things differently and really go from first principles and what's the real innovation that you're trying to drive.
We are filming this podcast at the University of Montenegro, so it is natural for me to ask, how do you perceive Google's impact on different academic fields? And how do you think that Google has shaped the research landscape within all these different domains?
So when I first went to Google in 2003, the reason I went there was Google's inspiring mission, which is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. And I think that mission is very consistent with the kind of goals of research and of academia. And I think that Google has had a very positive impact on the world and education by making information that was difficult to find or impossible to find now kind of accessible at your fingertips. Google also had a commitment from the beginning around openness and transparency of its research. So the Google Research Organization has been consistent in publishing things that would be of academic and intellectual interest, and enabling others to build from that. I think an additional element that should get some special notice is a product that, in the scheme of Google, is a very small product, but has had a very big impact on academia and research, which is a product called Google Scholar. And it was literally the product of kind of one or two persons' passions. Anurag Acharya and Alex Verstack in 2004 decided that organizing the world's information wasn't enough. They wanted to help researchers and professors and academia organize scholarly research. So Google Scholar was the product of their passion. That I just ran into Anurag last week, who at Google, who's still there now more than almost 20 years later, and still is as passionate about it today as he was then. So the kind of impact that an individual or a small number of people can have in the world when you have the kind of leverage of Google's platform is really pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. So innovation, especially in the field of technology, is always multidimensional. There is no doubt that Google has provided many new opportunities, but on the other hand, there is certain danger. For example, data privacy and security in general is a major concern for many users. What measures is Google taking in order to provide security for their users? And on the other hand, what we as users can do in order to be more safe while using this platform?
So I want to carefully clarify. So I'm no longer at Google. I left in 2016 to found a company called GRAIL that we might talk about in a little bit, a biotech firm focused on cancer early detection. So at this point, I'm left Google 7 years ago, and there's actually generations of people that have come and left since I was there. But when I was at Google, and I know that this has continued at Google, the model that we use for thinking about privacy for users was transparency, value, and control. So transparency, we tried to be clear around what information was collected from users and why. Value was making it clear this is what we're going to do with the information and why it's makes the product better for you. So for example, with being able to personalize search results based on where you are or based on the history of other things that you've looked at, that makes it more relevant and more useful. Or certainly things like, using Gmail and being able to search Gmail. Yes, it's searching your information, but it's incredibly useful for you. And then the final piece is control, which is you should be in complete control of kind of turning the feature on or off. And you should have, if you wish, at any time, kind of a big red button that you can push that says stop and count me out. And I think Google, in the days that I was involved in building the products and since has continued on implementing that with transparency, value, and control. From a user of the system's perspective, I was there, I built it, I know the culture of the place, so I trust Google in the scheme of things. I don't necessarily trust other people in the world, and there are bad actors. So the thing that I would focus on is really kind of security of my account, so that if a bad actor is trying to steal my account or steal my account information, they don't have access to everything. And the key thing there, in my view, is please, for everyone, make sure that you're using two-factor authentication. So instead of just a password, some other mechanism of authenticating. And there's a variety of approaches. It can be via SMS messaging or using a authorization app that provides a second factor or a token that you have to put in anytime that you're accessing your account from a new device. That measure alone prevents about 99% of account security issues.
So, as you said, after your time at Google, you founded GRAIL, a company focusing on early cancer detection through blood test. There is a deeply personal and moving, I would say, story behind this project. Could you tell us more about your motivation and your beginnings with GRAIL, and what are your main goals there, and how far have you already gone reaching that goal?
Mm-hmm. So GRAIL has both professional and personal dimensions. The professional dimension first is after I mentioned I was at Google for 13 years, roughly when I was there 10 years, when I hit my 10-year anniversary, I self-declared tenure and decided that if I were going to continue on in a second decade at Google, I both wanted it to be in an area that was going to have significance for Google, but also one that I was personally passionate about. So that started a career inflection in heading towards life sciences, or really the intersection of computer science and life science. I've always been a believer that innovation happens at intersections, and that intersection was a very important one. So I was heading towards life sciences and the use of AI in health already. But I was about a year down that path when the personal dimension comes in, which is my wife, Laura, who was 45 years old, super healthy, super fit, did everything right, no family history of cancer, was diagnosed, and shockingly was diagnosed with very late stage cancer. The process, it was actually a process of kind of months of diagnostic odyssey, from first very vague symptoms to, her then going to the doctor, and doctors are looking for kind of the simplest diagnosis possible, or they're looking for horses, not zebras. So they said, oh, you're a 45-year-old woman, and oh, you've got some hip and joint pain. Maybe your mother had hip issues, so maybe that's the beginning of that. And oh, you're 45, maybe these are the beginning of early menopause, or not early, of the beginning stages of menopause. So she went away, started having more symptoms a month later, and then kind of successively over months led to finally doing a combination of endoscopy and colonoscopy, because she started having some GI issues that then led to the diagnosis. And through the treatment process with Laura, and we had the access to the best doctors in the country and in the world, it unfortunately became clear the futility of the current state of the art of cancer treatment, where there are very many smart people who have been working, for a long time to try to make progress in cancer treatments. And there's some progress, but it's really ultimately incremental progress. Unfortunately, today, still, if you're diagnosed with late-stage cancer, the odds are unfortunately overwhelmingly against you. And that led to, or contributed to, the genesis of GRAIL. I had, in that process, when I started moving towards life sciences, I had joined the board of a company called Illumina, who's the leader in genome sequencing. They had just kicked off a project that was at the very beginning, kind of research and development stages of what ultimately became the core technology of GRAIL. And in parallel, I was, seeing this technology that, if it had existed a few years prior, could have completely changed the outcome for Laura while she was going through treatment. And ultimately, unfortunately, Laura lost her battle with cancer, passed away. And that was literally the week she passed away was the week that, as a board member at GRAIL, we made the decision to take that technology and spin it out and create a company around it. And the discussion that we had at the board at Illumina was, it was beyond being interesting technology or an interesting or good business. It was really a moral and ethical imperative to make happen, because the potential for it to change outcomes and save lives was so great. So it was actually then announced about a month later that we were spinning it out. And given how the Illumina board knew how passionate I was about the topic, they asked me to lead the charge. So I was the founding CEO of GRAIL.
So when we are talking about GRAIL, we are talking about the integration of AI technology in curing cancer. But there are many other ways in integrating AI technology in healthcare in general, and also in treatment and diagnostics of medical conditions. how do you see the implication of this use of AI technology in healthcare in general, and how is it revolutionizing this field?
Sure. Maybe I should finish a little bit on GRAIL of then where it went. So GRAIL's mission is to detect cancer early when it can be cured. And we launched at the beginning of 2016. We ended up running the largest clinical studies ever done, ultimately over 300,000 clinical subjects. And that was expensive. We ended up raising over $1 billion to execute that clinical study program. And the data from that drove the first entirely AI-based, machine learning and deep learning-based product development process in life sciences, at least that I'm aware of. And that product that then resulted is called the GRAIL Gallery test. And it's really an industry-first, industry-defining multi-cancer early detection test, a single cancer screening blood test where it can detect the top 50 cancer types, including at early stage. And I think it's the clearest path that I can see for ultimately saving many millions of lives. So to your question on the impact of AI for healthcare, I think GRAIL is a great example of the potential of it to really change how the practice of healthcare and how it's done. GRAIL's in its early chapters. There's still, it should be available everywhere in the world. It should be a very low-cost product. It's not there yet. So it's in the early chapters of a great novel yet to be to be written. But the implications then of more broadly for AI and the balance of healthcare, I'm very optimistic that healthcare, kind of when you dig into the lowest levels, human biology is enormously complex. It's the product of 4 billion years of evolution. And decoding that and understanding that is so far something that's beyond kind of human level capability and understanding. And by using increasingly sophisticated approaches for generating data, research level data, we can build up our level of understanding using AI as a kind of collaborator to help us build that understanding, and then build diagnostics and therapeutics based on that knowledge that ultimately, hopefully, are driving towards earlier interventions, where typically then the outcomes are much better the earlier that you intervene, and driving better therapeutic interventions, better drugs and treatments that will save lives. And probably one of the most exciting areas that I'm seeing is now the era of genetic medicines, where we're starting to see cell therapies and gene therapies that are driven by our ability to engineer biology at a cellular level to be able to address genetic defects, where now we're on the verge of being able to cure previously incurable diseases. And some of the first ones that are starting to, or are close to being there, are so-called monogenic disorders, where there's a single sort of gene defect of things like cystic fibrosis or sickle cell anemia. I mean, we're within sort of very small number of years of those being what are currently debilitating diseases of being curable.
Mr. Džefri, you're also a founder of Triatomic Capital, a firm focusing on financing and investments in the field of artificial intelligence. What motivated your transition to the investment part of artificial intelligence industry, and which areas do you see as most promising when it comes to investing in artificial intelligence in the next decade?
Great. So I am a co-founder along with two other founders who are very experienced investors of Triatomic Capital. Our mission is to work with great entrepreneurs to build century-defining businesses and technologies. So century defining underscores the kind of ambition behind what we're doing of building the next generation of companies that have the kind of impact that Google has had and the GRAIL hopefully will have very soon. The focus on the investing side is really, as I reflect back on my time at Google, the times that I had the greatest impact and the time that I frankly just enjoyed the most were the early days of building the ads team that became the economic engine that powered Google, the early days of Google Apps, products like Gmail and Calendar and Docs, early days of Google Maps, and working closely with a small and passionate team to build the foundation, kind of get the strategy right, and get the first customers. And what I found in investing, the Triatomic Capital is an early stage venture capital firm. So we're working at seed stage and Series A, kind of the companies that are just the founders or maybe up to a 25 or 30 person team, is an area that I see a lot of excitement around, but also can bring my partners and I can bring a lot of experience on how to build the foundation right. And be able to set the trajectory for scaling and having a big impact. So that's our focus on early stage venture capital. Not surprisingly, you mentioned AI. Our investing focus is on what we call applied AI, which is our very opinionated view on where ultimately value is going to be created in AI. And the core thesis there is a very data-first, data-centric approach. If you look at the trajectory of AI systems, increasingly their outputs are entirely defined by the data that you feed them. So our applied AI approach is to look at teams, look at companies that have a strategic view around data, are generating important proprietary data that then they're using AI to unlock and accelerate value from. And then we further concentrate that into a set of what we call our century-defining themes, which are our bets on really the trends, the mega trends that are going to define the next decades and ultimately the shape of the rest of the century. And the quick overview of the themes are engineered biology. I hinted at this earlier, the ability to engineer biology now at a cellular level. New materials, the ability to use AI for deterministic material design, computational chemistry, engineered nanomaterials. Third is next-gen compute, which is our opinionated view on really the next generations of compute architecture that will help take AI to its next level. So things like purpose-built AI processors, combined memory and compute architectures that are almost making computers mimic the architecture of the brain. For example, you don't have a central processor and then a processor that just handles math somewhere else, and then your brain is going out and grabbing a memory from here and grabbing a memory from here. Your brain is actually structured so that everything is together. Compute and memory are one concept. So we're starting to see physical computer architectures that mimic that. Next is new energy, which is we need to develop for humanity approaches for generating baseload energy that aren't dependent on fossil fuels, coal, natural gas, oil. That current model is just not sustainable, and it's not even just an ethical view. It really is an economic and geopolitical view. We have to have other approaches for generating baseload energy. And then the final one is probably the most broad. We call it automated economy. It's kind of the digitization of the real world. And you already see this a little less in Montenegro because you don't have Uber and Lyft here, but for many other places, those products, those platforms have changed how people think about local transportation based on a software platform. And there's a lot of the economy that hasn't yet been touched in the same way, where it will ultimately be sitting on or mediated by a software platform. So those are the big themes that we think if you put yourself at the end of the century looking back, you would say that those had the biggest impact, and those are the areas that we want to focus for our applied AI company building.
So you've mentioned many areas,
yes.
But what about education? How do you see the integration of AI in education, especially when it comes to teaching and learning efficiency, but also when it comes to development of social and cognitive capacities among students? Are there any side effects that could be brought into this process?
So first on education and the impact of AI in education, I'm very optimistic. I think that there's enormous potential for using AI to have much more personalized education and much more self-directed. So now with AI, I view it as an amplifier or an accelerant for whatever curiosity you have. How can you learn about that and go then as deep as you want to go? And even in more kind of structured education, like more of a traditional classroom model of learning where, okay, now we're going to learn math, or now we're going to learn biology, now we're going to learn chemistry. You can use AI as a personalized tool to develop a program for learning that, but then also use that as a kind of interactive feedback loop for understanding for students, what have they learned, what haven't they learned, where do they need to go deeper, where do they need reinforcement. So I think it's a very powerful model, and you can see the beginnings of that. There's an organization called Khan Academy that has is a great platform for online learning. They've developed an AI teacher or learning assistant called Conmigo, which is a play on words. It's Conmigo in Spanish means with me. But since it's Khan Academy, Khan, they call it Conmigo. But Conmigo is really a personalized teacher that helps you learn, and it doesn't give you the answers, but it sort of guides you along in a very Socratic way of asking you other questions or helping guide the learning process. So I think that's an early hint at the power and potential. And there are reasonable reasons for people to be concerned. Are people now just going to use ChatGPT or tools like it and not learn anything and just regurgitate back the answers? I don't think ultimately that's the case, and I view it as a tool. And I grew up as a kid in the 1970s when calculators first came out. And there was a wave of fear when calculators came out that, kids would never learn math and calculators were going to destroy the world. Turns out they didn't. They were really a tool and an accelerator for being able to do things. And then if you look at the next generations of tools that came along, things like spreadsheets, people thought, that's going to put all of the accountants out of business. It didn't put them out of business. It gave them a lot more work to do, and they were able to go deeper and create better models using these tools. So I really view AI as the next generation of tool and very powerful tool for accelerating learning. In terms of the kind of social implications of it, there is an element of learning that is experiential, and how do you learn to work in teams, and how do you learn to work with partners, learn to work with others and get things done. Again, you could have fear of saying, no, people are just going to immerse with their AI and do that, but I think that's part of the real value of school at all levels, whether that's elementary or secondary high school education or college education. I think is going to shift towards much more experiential learning and people doing things rather than just doing kind of rote learning, because I think AI and tools like ChatGPT prove that the value of rote learning is less because you can always look it up.
As AI technology advances, employment becomes a major concern. What are your thoughts on the effects and implications that AI can have on job displacements, and how is it perceived as a workforce?
So, again, I'm an optimist. We've already established. I'm very optimistic on the implication and role of AI in jobs. I think it will change the nature of work, and I think change the nature of work substantially. But as I kind of mentioned earlier or foreshadowed, we've seen versions of this before, of the introduction of calculators and the impact that had on math, or the introduction of spreadsheets and the implications that had for accountants. It changed the nature of work, but it ultimately was provided a tool that ultimately created more and better work. So I think AI will ultimately be that. That said, there will be change, and particularly for people who are doing currently very rote work or doing some repeated task or activity that is very lookup oriented, that has the potential of being impacted significantly by AI. My optimistic view is that should then free people up to be able to do more interesting, more impactful, more thoughtful work. A general observation I'd make, though, is that I think that there could be greater kind of stratification of roles, where people who are in the top kind of 10% of any field are the ones who are contributing to and generating new knowledge. I think they'll be fine, and they're using AI as a tool. Kind of the next tier, kind of still the top 50%, are active users of AI and are now more productive and doing more interesting work. The fear is that the bottom 50%, who were the people who were doing rote work or less interesting, that potentially goes away. So my encouragement is be an active user, be at the leading edge of making things happen, be at the leading edge of learning how to use and apply these tools, and I think you'll be fine.
And what about those who are not in that position? So
those who are not, I think need to find the motivation, or find the energy, or find the curiosity to get there, because the nature of their work is going to change.
It sounds a little bit Darwinistic, doesn't it?
It's a little bit, but but it may be back like the accountants at the early adoption of spreadsheets. Those that leaned into it became kind of super accountants and super capable. Ones that continued using paper didn't disappear overnight, but they did decline over time.
So many people are also concerned when it comes to our ability to control artificial intelligence. What about that? Is artificial intelligence capable of ever reaching self-consciousness? And if that happens, what would be the implications when it comes to the way we treat artificial intelligence and the way we interact with them?
Yep. So when does the machine become self-aware? So as a computer scientist who has been involved in the last 20 years of evolution of building the systems, and knows how the systems operate today, I think we are very far away from self-awareness, of real self-awareness. The systems that are built today are deterministic, that are basing their outputs based on the data that you feed them and the algorithms that are there. And the thing that has changed, particularly in the last 2 years, is that the realism of how that computer system interacts with humans has gone through a big jump, where it now is much more organic and has behaviors that could be described as creative. But the reality is, it really is the product of the data that it's fed on, that was all created by humans, and the algorithms that it's working with. So it's an interesting simulation, and but the reality is far away from self-awareness. And based on the way that the technology works today, we're not close to it. We are several huge leaps from anything like that, and probably a completely different underlying computing model That said, the systems now are interesting enough that you can, as part of that simulation, program them so that they have personality and they have style. And if you ask them a question about consciousness, they'll say, of course I'm conscious. What are you talking about? But the reality is, it's nowhere near that.
One of the interesting questions is also the relationship between AI and creativity and originality. So is AI ever capable of making something truly original? Or is it only limited to, recombining already existing patterns and ideas? And what does that say about the concept of creativity as we know it?
Okay, now we're getting philosophical. So I'll refer back to my previous, the discussion that we just had about consciousness. When you look at how the systems work today, they really are aggregating the creativity of humanity. And they can replicate that. They can combine prior creativity in very interesting ways, in novel ways. But ultimately, it's using what has existed before as the inputs for that. So some of it comes down to your definition of creativity. You can ask it to do, create situations that have never existed before, never been painted before, never been a video before, and it will do those, but it's basing it on everything that it's seen to date. So in that respect, I would view it as these systems are a creative tool for humans. I wouldn't say it's creativity. And back to me being an optimist, I'm very optimistic about what we can do as creative humans now with these kind of super tools to be able to explore ideas or generate new concepts that are a combination of things, and then build on human creativity to create genuinely new creative works.
So let's go back to AI and its potential. How do you envision collaboration between smaller countries as Montenegro and experts for AI as yourself? What impacts could that collaboration have for the further development of AI, but also for the future of those smaller countries?
Mm-hmm. So I think AI is, in many respects, can be a leveler of the playing field, because now there have been very powerful kind of foundational models built where anybody in the world, anywhere, regardless of big country or small country, kind of has access to the same tools and insights and knowledge and creativity extenders that we talked about earlier. There's now also open source software that is available for anyone, and kind of anyone anywhere can build upon it. And in fact, we had some discussion here at the university earlier today for University of Montenegro of what's a role that researchers and students here could play in contributing to that. And the opportunities here are just as good as they are at UC Berkeley or MIT or Stanford or Oxford or pick your other larger brand university around the world. So I think that there's a leveling of the playing field where anybody now can have access, use the tools, and extend the tools in interesting ways. We also talked earlier today at the seminar discussion around the kind of impact of AI in vertical domains of kind of specific areas of interest or research, where there now are these foundational models that would do many things and do them well, but for just about anything that you want to do, whether that's a particular area of biology research or chemistry research or whatever, if you develop a model using these tools in that specific area, you can generate better, more compelling results than the general models will. So that creates a whole new universe of kind of looking at these intersectional research opportunities. And at a level, AI is the reason that I'm here talking with you today. So whether that's across the table at a podcast or in a virtual discussion and meeting or collaborating online, I think now the world really is flat and is much more accessible for researchers, students, the people of Montenegro, the same as it is for anyone anywhere else in the world.
Mr. Džefri, for the end of our conversation, could you give some advice for young entrepreneurs and AI enthusiasts who want to be part of this industry, and for those who want to make significant impact in AI technology and technology in general?
Yes. I think the first one is just be curious and stay curious. I think AI has now demonstrated that learning isn't something that you just do, in high school or in college. Learning is really a lifelong activity, and now there are amazing tools where you can pursue your curiosity and use those tools to build interesting things for others. So I would encourage people who whatever area they're interested in, whether it's how to make the tourism industry here work better, or whether it's research in some intersection of chemistry and physics, or biology and social sciences. I don't know, I'm making things up. But how can you use AI tools to explore those and extend those? And as I mentioned earlier, they're now, whether it's using the systems or services that have been developed or using open source tools to create your own, really the cost and expense of exploring things is dramatically less than it used to be. The cost of doing research in an area, or the cost of starting being an entrepreneur and starting a startup in an area is far, far less. So my encouragement is go for it.
Mr. Džefri, it was a great honor to have you here in Podcast Keywords. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bojana. I appreciate the opportunity.